There's a story that the Torah tells us in this week's PARSHA, and at first glance it's the story about two individual people, but to assume that's all it means is, I think, underestimating what the Torah is trying to get at. Paro has a problem. The Jewish population is increasing, and Paro assumes that the Jews will be the natural allies of his enemies, and in case war breaks out, they will join our enemies and drive us from the land. So we have to be smart and somehow suppress the population. So what's Paro's idea? Paro's idea is Vayasinu olav sori misim, the man anosa b'sivloisam, that he places upon them taskmasters in order to torment them, and he puts them to work. They have to build cities for Paro, Pisam, Ramses, and it doesn't work. It's counterproductive. Kasher yanu also, as much as they afflicted them, kenir v'v'chem yifrots, so they multiply. Just as an aside, it's a very interesting maral in the Gur Aryeh. And we know Rashi says that the rate of reproduction was amazing. That they gave birth to Shisha b'keres echad. That they gave birth to 6 children at one time. Well, the mother would give birth to what's 6? Sextuplets? 6. So it's an amazing number of 6. There's another opinion in the Medrash which says that a woman would give birth to 12 at one time. So what is the symbolism of these numbers, 6 and 12? So the Maral says simply that the Medrash tells us that later, when Moshe Rabbeinu was already living in the house of Paro, Moshe gave Paro advice. He said that, listen, you want to maximize the production of your slaves, you have to give them a day off. Give them off Shabbos. So Moshe bequeathed Shabbos to the Jewish people, and therefore really the optimal work week of a slave is 6 days. So since the pasuk says Kasher Yanu also Kenir V'Chen Yifrots, that as much as Paro tormented them, so they were fruitful and multiplied. So the number 6 makes sense, because since the optimal work week is 6 days, at that point they were working 7, but the optimal work week is 6 days, so therefore they had 6 children. Since Paro made them work by day and by night, so it could be argued that really it should be 12, because normally a slave would work 6 work days, but if they had to work at nights as well, then it really was 12, and that's the symbolism of the number 12. But the point is, it was counterproductive. What did Paro think? Why did Paro think that enslaving the Jews would result in a diminution of the birth rate? I mean, is this something natural, that if you work hard, so you'll father fewer children? Okay, let's put that in the back burner. But it doesn't work. So Paro does something. First, he turns the screws harder. You see, if you look at the Chumash, it says first, Vayasimu olav sori misim, Paro placed upon them taskmasters. These were like tax collectors. They collected a labor tax to afflict them. And it says that didn't work. Kasher yanu also kenir v'chen yifros. And then it says, the next verse, V'yavidu mitzrayim es b'nei Yisrael b'farech, that the Mitzrayim enslaved the Bnei Yisrael with backbreaking labor. Now it already says that didn't work. So what is going on over here? So the Ramban understands that there were really 2 stages in the Gezeirah. The first stage of the Gezeirah was that the Jews were enslaved to the government. It was a labor tax. Sari Misim, they were tax collectors. It was a labor tax that they had to contribute a certain amount of labor for government projects. That didn't work. The more they were tortured, the more children they had. But Paro, much as a Keynesian economist, right, assumes that if it didn't work, it's not because the idea is flawed. It's because we didn't do enough of it. Because we didn't torture them enough. If we torture them more, then it will work. So Paro Paro made a second decree. The second decree was that the Egyptians could enslave them. The private citizens could take Jews as slaves. And that's Vayavidu Mitzrayim es Bnei Yisrael b'farach. Now it wasn't that they were paying a labor tax to Paro. Now the Egyptian people were allowed to enslave the Jews. And Paro figured this additional enslavement, that will work, that will be enough. And the Torah here doesn't tell us exactly whether it was effective or not. It's equivocal. We can learn the psukim either way. But then it says, Vayomer Melech Masan Lamiyaldos Ivrios. The king of Mitzrayim spoke to the Jewish midwives. Now here, this is something which is very private. Until now, it was Paro speaking to his people. Vayomer El Amo. He spoke to his people. Now he's not speaking to his people anymore. Now he's doing something surreptitiously. And he speaks to the Jewish midwives. Ibn Ezra points out that, a big nation, how many midwives must they have had? Certainly more than two. So what is the idea? He speaks to the Jewish midwives. One is named Shifra, one is named Pua. It doesn't seem to be that he spoke to everybody. So the Ibn Ezra explains that they were the head of the midwives. It was a union, I guess. And Shifra and Pua were in charge. And therefore he spoke to them, and the instructions were meant to be transmitted to everybody. And he says that when you give birth, when you deliver the Jewish women, then you'll see if it's a son, kill it, and if it's a daughter, let it live. And this is how we'll suppress the birth rate. We'll suppress the birth rate by killing all the male boys. The Medrash points out, Medrash Rav in this week's PARSHA, also in PARSHA Emor, points out that if you really want to diminish the birth rate, you should kill the women, not the men. Because one man can father children with 1,000 women. Right? Whereas if you kill a woman, that's it, she cannot produce children. So Paro, the Medrash calls it lunacy. It was idiocy. Like, what did Paro think he was going to accomplish by killing the men? You miss one man, and that's it, and you're finished. Okay, put that in the back burner. So it says, "Vatirena hamiyaldos esolukim," that the miyaldos were scared of the Ribono Shel Olam, and they didn't listen to Paro. And not only did they not kill the children, but they sustained them. They gave them food and support, and therefore Paro again was unsuccessful. Paro calls them in and says, "Why did you do this?" So they made an excuse. They said that the Jewish women aren't like Egyptian women. They themselves are like midwives. Right? By the time we get there, the babies are delivered. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu rewarded them. The pasuk says he made houses for them. Their descendants became many and great. And then Paro hatches the last decree that all the Jewish babies should be thrown into the river. And again, Chazal tell us that this also was only on males. Kol habeina yilad, only on males. Females were spared. What was Paro's idea? What did Paro think? Again, killing the males.
Wasn't he trying to destroy an army?
Pardon?
Wasn't he trying to destroy a potential army?
So that's a possibility. That's a possibility. That the idea was that these were the potential rebels. This is what Darchei says. Darchei says over here that Paro did not so much want to reduce the population. He wanted to break the ideology of the people. In other words, he wanted to take away that which was uniquely Jewish about them. You see, think about it for a second. Paro's starting point was that the increased Jewish population is a problem. Why is it a problem? Because they're going to join our enemies. Meaning, Paro saw it isn't just that they're going to be large numbers. I mean, if they're a large number of Jews, but the Jews would be allies of the Egyptians, to the contrary, that would strengthen the state. In other words, the starting point is that there is something that is antagonistic between the Jews and the Egyptians. The Jews will therefore side with the enemy. And that's why the population increase is a problem. So what we have to do is we have to break that character of the people. We have to destroy that character of the people. Who are the bearers of values? in society? Who are the ones who transmit beliefs and values? Paro assumed it was men. That's what he assumed. And therefore, if you want to break that which is uniquely Jewish, you have to kill the men. If you kill the men, the problem is solved. And the Darchei puts it this way. He says that the women will want to get married. Everyone wants to get married. So if there are no Jewish men to marry, they'll marry Egyptian men. If they marry Egyptian men, they will take on the values of the Egyptians. And the problem is solved. But the problem really is the Jewish men. The Jewish men are transmitting values that are alien, that are foreign, that are anti-Egyptian. And therefore, that's why it's a problem. So he's not doing this to suppress the population. That's what the Medrash says. It's a shtuz. To suppress the population, you kill the women, you don't kill the men. But if you believe that it is males who transmit the values, then it is a smart idea. You kill the men, and this is how you solve the problem. It says, what was Paro's mistake? Paro's mistake was that he underestimated the women. That really, in Mitzrayim, was the opposite. It wasn't the men who were the ones who transmitted values, it was the women who transmitted values. And it was the women who, with Mesiras Nefesh, were willing to fight to maintain and sustain the Jewish people. And therefore, this story of Shifra and Puah is really not simply a story about two people. No, it's a story which is meant to exemplify Jewish womanhood generally. It happens to be, perhaps these are the two most heroic ones. But in fact, this was something that was common to the Jewish people. Now the Gemara, Masechah Sota, quotes the famous Medrash. The Medrash says that the B'schus Nashim Tzidkonius, the merit of the righteous women, Nigulu Avasein Mitzrayim, our forebears were redeemed from Mitzrayim. So the Medrash says, what did the Jewish women do? That when the men were in the fields, and they were working very hard, and they were dejected, and they were depressed, so the women went, and they made themselves up nicely. You may remember we talked about the mirrors that they owned, that were donated later to the Mishkan. They used these mirrors to beautify themselves, and they would go out to the fields, and they would tease their husbands and arouse desire in them, and their husbands would be with them there in the fields. And the women gave birth to babies in the fields because they couldn't do it in the places where the Egyptians would look. And they had no place to keep these children. So they actually left them in the fields, and miraculously they were spared and sustained. And these became the armies of Jews that ultimately left Mitzrayim. So the point was that the men, under normal circumstances, they would not have wanted to father children. They had to be seduced. They had to be enticed to be willing to father children. The mothers were the ones who were pushing for this population growth, and that's in the schus of Nashim Tzidkonius, Niglu Avasein Mitzrayim. Now, I think this relates to a very interesting observation that the Chazal made. The Meshech Chacham tries to explain in a different way. Now, the Mishnah says in Maseches Yevamos that men are obligated in the mitzvah to have children, and women are not obligated in the mitzvah to have children. Right? That the pru'urvu, the mitzvah to have children, is an obligation incumbent only on men, not on women. And the question is, why should that be? And the Gemara says the following. The Gemara says, how do we know it? It says, pru'urvu, be fruitful and multiply, umilu es ha'aretz, fill the land, v'kiv shua, and conquer the land. So the Gemara says, so ish darko l'kabesh, a man, his derech is to conquer. A man is military, he engages in conquest. It says women don't fight in the armies, they don't engage in conquest. Therefore, if Torah says kivshua, then it means the women are exempt. So the Meshech Chacham just asks the question, like, why should it be the women are exempt? What's the rationale behind it? So he offers a conjecture which, again, has nothing to do with the kivshua, nothing to do with the question of conquest. He says simply as follows, that childbirth is dangerous. Childbirth is dangerous. Now, we don't hear of many women dying in childbirth, but that's because 98% of women that have babies do it in hospitals, and they're monitored, and there's professional care. If there's any complication, there are doctors there, and so on and so forth. So Baruch Hashem, it's not as dangerous as it once was, but it's not that it isn't dangerous. Now, Yoledes, a woman having a baby, is considered it's considered a person in a life-threatening situation. You can machal Shabbos, right, to save a childbearing woman. Why? Because it is a danger. The fact that mortality is rare is only because we have so many interventions, but it really is a dangerous situation. So therefore, the Meshech Chochmah offers the following conjecture. He says, for men, that it is very safe. The role that men play doesn't entail any danger. So men are obligated. To obligate women, you can't obligate a woman to put her life on the line for this if she wants to. She wants to. Does she want to? She's not obligated to. That's what Meshech Chochmah says. Now, the theory is a good theory. And there are probably some truth to that. Because you can't impose an obligation on a person which requires such a high level of sacrifice. But it seems unlikely that the exemption, if it's derived from the kivshua, if it's derived from the pasuk which says that be fruitful and multiply and conquer the world, so we say that a man conquers, a woman doesn't conquer, it's hard to imagine that the exemption is related to a totally side issue of the danger of giving birth to children. I think that the correct explanation is something like this. The Torah only obligates us to do the things that we would not do naturally. Right? Things that are natural, we don't need the Torah to tell us to do it. Right? There's no mitzvah in the Torah for parents to love their children. Because why not? It's very important. Parents love their children. Because that's natural. So therefore the Torah doesn't have to give a mitzvah to love your children. On the other hand, the Torah does tell children to honor their parents. Why? Not as natural. Right? For that we need the Torah to give us a warning. But to love your children, that goes without saying. It says the drive of a woman to have children, the maternal instinct is natural. Is natural. We don't need the Torah to tell women you have to have babies. Right? The drive of a woman to have a baby is natural. Where do we see it's natural? I'll give an example. The Gemara in Brachos says that when Chana, the mother of Shmuel, prayed for a child, so it says, Vatidaber Chana al liba. Chana spoke on her heart. She spoke on her heart. And the Gemara is troubled by this expression. What does it mean that when Chana prayed to Hashem, she prayed on her heart? So Maharsha explains the question. And the question is that normally that expression, to speak on someone's heart, is when I'm speaking to another person and trying to comfort that person. So, for example, the pasuk says that when the Nevi'im are told to foretell the coming of Mashiach, it says, Dabru alev Yerushalayim, speak to the heart of Yerushalayim, to comfort them, to console them, that the Golus will end and there'll be redemption. But when you're praying to Hashem, what is the meaning of this expression? That she spoke on her heart. Like, who does she speak to? She's speaking to herself. She's speaking to Hashem. So what's on the heart? So the Gemara understands al iske liba. She spoke about her heart. She spoke about her heart. What did she say about her heart? So the Gemara says, she said an amazing thing. She's like this. Everything you made in a human being was made for a purpose. But this itself is fascinating because you know that there are people that believe that there are organs that have no function that are left over from earlier evolutionary stages. You know, so for many years people thought the appendix had no function, right? But in earlier evolutionary stages it might have a function, so there's the vestigial organ that we're left with. But all of a sudden it's discovered that they have a function. So it says everything that a person has a purpose. The eyes have a purpose, the ears have a purpose, the nose has a purpose, everything, the hands, the feet, everything has a purpose. So she pointed to her heart and said, these breasts that you gave me, that you gave a woman, what are they for? They're to nurse a child. So if I'm not going to have a child, then it comes out that this is levatala. I was given these for nothing. So give me a child. That was her prayer. So what does that mean? What is her argument? Her argument is that her desire for a child isn't because she wants to produce a child who's going to do great things in the future and he's going to be a mover and shaker, even though he ultimately was. Shmuel HaNavi was, according to Chazal, the equal of Moshe and Aaron. But the point was, this is her fulfillment. In other words, if she does not have a child, then her very existence, or some aspect of her very existence, is levatala, it's for nothing. Like, what was I put here for? Certainly there are parts of my body that were put here for the purpose of bearing a child, nursing a child. So if I'm not given a child, then what was I created for? At least what were these parts of my body created for? This is her natural fulfillment. That's why it's very interesting that what type of son does she pray for? You know, people pray for children, they pray for great children, tzaddikim, etc. So she said, give me zera anoshim. Give me zera anoshim. The seed of men. So the Gemara brings various interpretations, but the final interpretation, the majority opinion was that zera anoshim means zera hamuvla bein anoshim. I want an average child. He shouldn't be unusually tall or unusually short. He shouldn't be unusually smart. He shouldn't be unusually foolish, etc., etc. An average child. Now, of course, to a Jewish parent, I don't think it's an average child. But what was she saying? In other words, it wasn't that she wanted a child because the impact this child would have on the world and what the child would accomplish and so on and so forth. It's a child, even a vanilla child, even a generic child, would have satisfied her request. So therefore, even the Zera Anoshim, Zera Hamul Lebein Anoshim, just an average child, nothing outstanding, nothing unusual. I want a child. That's the maternal instinct of a woman. What about a man? Is this natural to a man? I don't want to say something which is going to be interpreted as sexist, but I think not. Right? I think to a man, he sees a child as a continuity of submission. The child will go on to accomplish something, to achieve something, something that is left undone by the father. He will continue. So it comes to Pasuk and says like this, that Hashem gives a directive, Pru'urvu, have children, Umilu Esaretz, fill the land to Kivshu and conquer the land, dominate the land, control the earth. Right? This is man's mission. Man's mission is to subdue and control the earth. Well, no human being can do this in a lifetime. So the Torah says, Pru'urvu, have children, reproduce, bear children, and achieve this end. So Chazal say that's a male thing. That's how a man thinks of children. Right? A man thinks of children in terms of what the children are going to go on to accomplish. So that's how a woman thinks. A woman doesn't think, I want to have children because the children are going to accomplish these things. I want to have a children, that's my fulfillment. That's my essence. That's what I am. I am a mother. Right? And therefore the Pasuk is talking to men, it's not talking to women. Right? And therefore the mitzvah only applies to men. You see, because to a man who sees the child as, in terms of what it will go on to do, in terms of its accomplishments, there could be many times in life, in history, where it doesn't appear so bright. It doesn't appear there's any future. So why should a person bother having children in such a case? Whereas to a mother, that would never be a reason not to have children. Right? She has to have children because her maternal instinct demands that she has children. Now let me illustrate this. There's another Gemara Masechtas Brachos, that says that the king Chizkiyahu was once ill. He became ill. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Navi Yeshaya to tell them that he's going to die. You're going to die from this illness. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yeshaya exactly what his sin was. So he comes to visit King Chizkiyahu, and the Navi Yeshaya tells him, listen, you're going to die. So what I do wrong? He says, you never got married. You don't have children. So Chizkiyahu said, well, I foresaw B'ruach HaKodesh that I'd have children who are Rishoyim. I foresaw that I have wicked children. So I figured, what's when I get married? Children are Rishoyim. So Yeshaya told him, what are you involving yourself in God's secrets? So what you're obligated to do, you have to do. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, it'll happen. What he wants. Right? You don't make cheshbonos like that. I saw Ruach HaKodesh, my children will be Rishayim. You have a mitzvah, you got to do it. So the Navi, so Chizkiyahu said to Yeshaya, okay, I'll tell you what, let me marry your daughter, and then perhaps my merit and your merit together will have righteous children. So Yeshaya says, it's too late. He says, Hashem already told me you're going to die. So Chizkiyahu said, no, forget it. He says, I have a Kabbalah, I have a tradition from my great-grandfather, David HaMelech. Even if there's a sharp sword in a person's neck, still, there's always hope. You can daven and stop whatever you're saying. That it's hopeless, there's always hope. And he prayed, it says he turned to the wall and he prayed, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Yeshai he has 15 more years. And he got married. And the PARSHA says he married Yeshai's daughter. And what happened? Well, the Gemara doesn't tell us what happened. Because so if you only learn Gemara, you don't know what happened. What happened? He had a son. And what do you think the son was? A tzaddik, Russia? The worst Russia imaginable. He was the king Menashe, who was the king whose idolatry was so flagrant. He brought an idol into the Beis HaMikdash itself, and it was in his reign, right, on top of everything else, he was blessed with longevity. He was a king for 52 years. So it wasn't just that he was a Russia, but he was a long-lived Russia. Though in his defense, I should say that he only was a Russia for the first half of his reign. After 26 years, he did tshuva, but even 26 years is a long reign. And the Churban was decreed in his lifetime. It happened much later, but the Churban was decreed in Menashe's lifetime. But in any case, it was exactly as Yeshaya said. Yeshaya said, you have a mitzvah. You have a mitzvah. But what you have to do, you have to do. And don't ask such questions about the future. That's a man thing, right? In other words, a man who sees the children not in terms of the fulfillment of his own impulse to have children, but rather in terms of their accomplishment, in terms of their achievement. So therefore, if he sees it with Ruach HaKodesh, that the children are going to be Rishayim, what's the point? What's the use? What's the use? Coming back to Mitzrayim, this is exactly the point. Now, Paro understood this. And Paro says, if we want to suppress the birth rate, what we have to do is impress upon the fathers that there is no hope and no future. If there is no hope and there's no future, then the fathers will not father children. They will not bring children into the world. Simple as that. But it's not that somehow hard work reduces your testosterone and therefore you'll become less fertile. It's simple as that. That if you put them to work and you say, this is it, this is what Jewish life is going to be in Mitzrayim, it's going to be enslavement. So the men are going to say, what's the point of having children? That's exactly how a man thinks. Who thought otherwise? The woman. Now, once upon a time when we spoke about this parsha, we understood that the women demonstrated tremendous vision, tremendous foresight. That they were able to foresee the ultimate geula and so on and so forth. But in reviewing it, it seems to be the exact opposite. That the correct understanding isn't that the women had a vision which transcended the men. Right? Because when you think about it for a second, when you read the Gemara, the women had no clue how these children are going to be sustained. They gave birth to them, they left them in the fields. It had to be a nace by which they were spared. But the women had this impulse, this understanding that we have to do what we have to do. And the Rebbeinu Shalom will do what he has to do. So it's more faith than vision. It's not that they were able to foresee the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and understand exactly how the story is going to unfold. Now, they had no idea even how these children that they give birth to will even survive. But they felt this is what we have to do. We are committed to motherhood. We are committed to life. And we will bring children into the world, and the Rebbeinu Shalom will do what he has to do. So whereas the male thing is to say, listen, I look ahead in the future, I see there's no future, just a chizkiyo. I see I'm going to have Rishoyim, so what's the point? So the Jews in Mitzrayim said, we foresee that we're going to, our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will be enslaved, so what's the point? It's not that the women foresaw the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the women foresaw the Geula. It's that the women said that what difference does it make? We have to do what we have to do. Because we are women, we are mothers. We have to bring forth life. If the Rebbeinu Shalom wants those children to live, he'll see to it that they live. If he doesn't want them to live, then they won't live. But in the meantime, we have to be true to what we are. That was the schus of the Noshim and Tzidkonias. And it's very interesting. I'll just mention one very fascinating thing. I mentioned it before. The Zohar HaKadosh says an amazing thing. The Zohar HaKadosh says that what was the great schus for which Klal Yisrael was saved from Mitzrayim? So we know the Gemara says all sorts of things. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit today. That they didn't change their names, didn't change their language, didn't change their clothing. But the Zohar HaKadosh says an amazing thing. That all those years in Mitzrayim, no woman ever had an abortion. That's what the Zohar says in PARSHA SHMOT. That was the great schus. And you think about it for a second. That there probably would have been women that would have said, what's the point of giving birth to a child? Go out to be a slave. Right? But that maternal instinct, that idea that a woman's role is to give life, that she was true to that maternal impulse and she didn't take away life. That was the schus for which the Jews were saved from Mitzrayim. And, I wonder, we live in a time that that abortion has become so rampant. And you wonder how closely related is this to the form that modern feminism has taken, which is that women should play male roles in the workplace and in society and so on and so forth. And to the extent that motherhood and childbirth is seen as an inconvenience often. In other words, how much does this legitimize abortion? But here, the Bnei Yisrael, they were faithful to their role as being life givers of mothers, and therefore not one committed an act of abortion. And that, say Chazal, was the schus for which Klal Yisrael was saved from Mitzrayim. I mean, that's really what Chazal is saying. B'schus Noshim Tzidkonias. In the merit of Noshim Tzidkonias, the Jews were redeemed from Mitzrayim. The commitment of the women to life. So the Gemara says it this way: it was in seducing their husbands to conceive the children. The Zohar says another aspect of it, that they didn't abort the children. But that was the great schus for which the Yetzias Mitzrayim took place. Yes.
The Egyptian plan to they didn't want reproduction anymore. Weren't they going to ruin their own slave society, their slave plan?
No, you see, you have to understand. Let's start the story from the beginning. There is a population, a free population. The Jews are free men, right? The Paro says if we let them increase, they'll join our enemies, right? And then they'll leave. They'll drive us out of the land. At that point, what if the Jews would have said, listen, we're leaving, we're going back to Eretz Yisrael? What would Paro have said at that point? He would have said, Seischem l'shalom, says for gesund. We'll miss you, right? But that would be the end of the problem, right? The problem is that the Jews in Egypt are subversive. They want to leave, let them leave. So instead, you can't get a whole group of people to leave, a whole army of people to leave. So instead, we have to suppress their natural birth rate by enslaving them. Okay, so if we can wipe them out, it's also good enough. And the Ramban asked the question. Ramban says, why did he bother enslaving them? Why did he just begin a program of genocide? That's the Ramban's question. The Ramban says, surprisingly, the people wouldn't have agreed with it.
The Egyptians.
The Egyptians would agree to it. Right? It's an amazing thing. And therefore, even when he spoke to the Mialdites, it says Paro alone spoke. And the Farshim stellt zu, they applied the Ramban, that this had to be surreptitious, this had to be something that was denial.
Is there any indication that they wanted to leave at that time?
That they wanted to leave?
Yeah, prior to the slavery.
The indication, if you remember, from the end of Parshas Vayigash, was that they wanted to stay. In other words, because originally, when they first came, they said, we're only staying as long as the famine. Which really should have resulted in their leaving right away, because when Yaakov came, the famine ended. Right? According to some Mepharshim, when Yaakov died, they came back. But after 5 more years, they should have left. But it says in the end of Parshas Vayigash, they settled in Eretz Goshen, and they took possession of it. So the Kliyakar infers from the Psukim that this speaks of the shame of the Jewish people, that they liked it where they were. They liked it where they were. They didn't want to leave. Right? And then it was too late to leave. But this is what the Jewish women were all about, and this was the great schus that they had, this commitment to life itself. Now, it's very interesting to note that it wasn't a commitment to Jewish values. It wasn't a commitment to Torah, to mitzvahs, to philosophical concepts. It was a commitment to the simple idea of life, of motherhood, of raising children. That was their commitment, and that was the schus for which Klal Yisrael was saved from Mitzrayim. Because again, until you have a nation which is alive and healthy on the most fundamental level, you can't begin to think of anything beyond that. Now, this is the first step. Shifra and Pua is very, very interesting. Chazal tell us the Shifra and Pua were not their real names. Who were they? So it's machlekes in the Gemara. One Mandamar says it was Isha Ubita. It was a woman and her daughter, meaning Yocheved and her daughter Miriam. Those were Shifra and Pua. The other opinion is it was Kala v'Chamaisa. It was a daughter-in-law and a mother-in-law, meaning it was Yocheved and the woman who would one day be her daughter-in-law, Elisheva Bas Aminadov, who ultimately married Aaron. Now, obviously, at that point, she wasn't her daughter-in-law yet. Aaron was just a baby. When Moshe Rabbeinu was born, Aaron was only 3 years old. But probably she was somewhat older, a couple years older. Maybe she was 5 years old, which is how old Miriam was at the time. And she would assist too. Right? It says in the pasuk, right? Shifra was actually the midwife. Pua just was paya. She cooed to the child to make the child feel better. That's a job that a 5-year-old can do. So either it was Miriam or it was Elisheva Bas Aminadov. And that's about like in the Gemara. But they were noteworthy people. They were famous people. So the question, Maral asks the question, so why does the Torah disguise their names? Why doesn't the Torah just tell us who they were, that we should know that these were great schuyas, these great women, Yocheved, Miriam, Elisheva, Bas Aminadov? Why does it go out of its way to hide their identities? That's the question. The Maral gives an answer, which is, again, an intriguing answer, but it doesn't seem to be the pshat answer. He says that their names are concealed because we want to conceal anything which has to do with the background of Moshe Rabbeinu. If you look at Perek Beis, the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, it says, "Vayelach ish mi beis Levi, v'yikach es bas Levi." That a man from the house of Levi came, married the daughter of Levi, they had a child, that child was Moshe. And their names aren't identified. We don't know that the name of the father is Amram and the name of the mother is Yocheved until in Parshas Vo'era, when the lineage is spelled out, so it tells us that fact, that this was his father's name, this was his mother's name. So why does the Torah conceal this as it's telling the story in the second parak of the PARSHA? Why does it just talk about a man and a woman? So the Maral says something very, very interesting. Maral says, because Moshe Rabbeinu was not an ish prati. He was not a individual person. He was an ish klali. He was a general person. We'll see what that means. And therefore the Torah doesn't want to talk about his parents. Because what does that mean? He's like this. I mean, I'm sure there's a depth to it, but the simple explanation is like this. In other words, children take after their parents. So if I tell you that this person is the son of Ruvain and Sarah, then you can expect certain things. Oh, well, he's Ruvain's son, Sarah's son. Then probably he'll have certain characteristics, physical characteristics, intellectual characteristics, temperament. There are certain things that are a natural consequence of having these parents. If I tell you this person has different parents, it's not Ruvain and Sarah, it's Shimon and Mivka, that explains why he's different, because he has different father, different mother, therefore they're different traits. The thing about Moshe Rabbeinu, the unique thing about Moshe Rabbeinu was that Moshe Rabbeinu was not a ish prati. He was not an individual who had a limited set of characteristics which were delineated by his background and where he came from. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a person who really could be anything he had to be. He had the full range of intellectual potentialities, the full range of character potentialities. And to illustrate this point, the Torah says that he was born to generic people, unnamed people, unspecified people. Now, obviously, he had a father and a mother, but it means that what he was not a consequence of being born to this father, being born to this mother. We talked about this concept in years past, but that's what the morale says. And therefore, since the Torah wants to conceal everything about Moshe Rabbeinu, as it's telling the story of its birth, it doesn't want to tell us the names of people who are related to Moshe Rabbeinu, because that would be like letting the secret out of the bag. So even though Shifra and Pua, let's say according to that first opinion in the Gemara, really is his mother Yocheved and his sister Miriam, so the Torah conceals that fact by giving them false names Shifra and Pua. Okay, it's a possibility. But to me it seems that a more reasonable explanation would be the following. That it's true. It's true that the story is about two people. But it's not that these two people were exceptional people, or these two people were outstanding people, that they were unusual people. In other words, if Par would have called any other two Jewish women, they would have done the same thing, they would have said the same thing. Because that's the nature of the Nashim Tzidkanias. The nature of the Nashim Tzidkanias was that they were committed to life. They would not, Rahman al-Aslan, be complicit in the snuffing of life. It happens to be that the two people that occupied these two positions as the head of the midwives union happened to have been, at that particular time, Yocheved and Miriam. It says, but if it would have been two other people, it would have been the same thing. Because this was something that was common to all the women of Mitzrayim. This was common to all the Nashim Tzidkanias. So therefore, we don't say that Shifra is Yocheved, or we don't say Pua is Miriam. We say Shifra. What does Shifra mean? Shifra means she's Mishaperes as a Vlad. She made the child beautiful by cleaning away the blood and all the uncleanliness when the child was born. That means whoever it would have been called Shifra. It's not that Yocheved is Shifra. Whoever would have played that role would be Shifra. And what does Pua mean? Pua means to kuta the child. So it happened to have been that it was Miriam. But it's not Miriam because it was Miriam. It wasn't something unique about Miriam, something special about her, or something special about Shifra. This was something that any woman in Mitzrayim would have done. It just happens to be that by some amazing coincidence it happened to have been Yocheved and Miriam. But it's not something outstanding that 1 in a million. Only they would have done it, no one else would have done such a thing. Now, this was the pattern of the Nashim Tzidkanias, and that's what the Torah conceals their names. If the Torah would tell us their names, we would say, yeah, Yocheved was such a special person, right? She therefore did this, but who would have done such a thing? Or Miriam, she was so special, she would have done such a thing. Who else would have done such a thing? Says, no, it's Shifra Pua. These are two people whose names are given to them because of the roles they play. But it would have been anybody. Right? But that's the schus Nashim Tzidkanias. The commitment of the Nashim Tzidkanias to life, right, entailed that whoever would have been in their position would have done the exact same thing. And that's what the Torah conceals their names, to tell us that it wasn't something that was unique to them because of their background, their upbringing, their family, what they had learned, etc. This was something that was common to all the women in Mitzrayim. So whoever the Shifra would have been she would have done the same thing. Whoever the pool would have done the same thing. That's the schus nashim and tzidkanias. And it's interesting that we see this later in the story. You know, it says that in the beginning of Perek Beis, it says that a man from the house of Levi took the daughter of Levi, and she conceived the child that was Moshe Rabbeinu, which is very puzzling because Moshe had older siblings. Right? He had a sister who was 6 years older and a brother who was 3 years older. Right? And all of a sudden it says that they get married and Moshe Rabbeinu was conceived. Well, where did the older children come from? So Chazal say that they were married before. They were married before. And they separated. Whose idea was it to separate? It was Amram's idea. Right? Amram said, what's the point of having children? Right? Again, this male thing. What's the point of having children? He says, we're going to have children, there'll be more slaves. So who dissuaded him? What did Chazal say? It was Miriam. Right? Now, in fact, Chazal say an amazing thing. The Medrash says that's another reason why she was named Puah. Right? Because the Medrash says in one pshat that Puah means to turn your nose. She turned her nose to her father, and she rebuked her father. Right? And she said, according to Chazal, that Shalcha Kashem Shal Para. Says your decree is worse than Paro's decree. Right? Your decree, Paro's decree is just to kill the boys. Right? Your decree is that if your decree is followed for one generation, there'll be no Jews at all. Right? So he was convinced, and he took Yocheved back, and Moshe Rabbeinu was conceived. But again, it's the same idea that the Nashon Tzidkanias, right? The Nashon Tzidkanias, again, brought about this birth. And the interesting thing again is that it's not so much because they have a vision of the future necessarily, as much as they understand that we have to do what we have to do, and then it's in the hands of the Ribono Shel Olam. And that's really faith. It's not vision, right? If I would know how everything is going to work out in the end, then okay, if you go through a rough time, and it'll work out in the end. But if you don't know how it's going to work out in the end, and you just do what the hour calls for, that's already a tremendous level of bitachon, and that is the level of Nashim Tzidkanias. We have a few minutes, so let me just reiterate something that we've talked about before. It's also something that we should be mindful of in this week's parsha. The Chazal say that what was the great merit that Klal Yisrael had in Mitzrayim. So we mentioned Zayar, which says no word of their child. We mentioned the schus nashim tzidkanias, but the Medrash says that it was really the schus of four things. They didn't change their names, their language, their clothing, and the fourth. Right? There are different versions in the Medrash. One version of the Medrash is Shlohayu behen dol Torah. There were no informers among them. In a situation where you have people that the Egyptians are over you, you might ingratiate yourself to the Egyptians by giving information or snitching on somebody. There were no dol Torah. And another interpretation is that they were gedurim ba'arayis. That they didn't consort with Egyptian men. Now, the Chazal say that it was only one time, there was one Jewish woman that ever had relations with an Egyptian man. Achas Yopirsim al-Kosev, the pasuk reveals that was the father of the Makalil, which is talked about in PARSHA Emor. And that's it. There was only one. So the Meshech Chochmah makes a point, a very important point, that it sounds very good, that they were very, very, very lofty. They kept their Jewish names, Hebrew, Jewish clothing. Yet we find, on the other hand, it was a time of tremendous spiritual decline. The Medrash says that the Jews in Mitzrayim practice Avodah Zarah. It's really a pasuk in Yechezkel, which says it explicitly that the Jews in Mitzrayim practice Avodah Zarah. Chazal say they were Movatel Bris Milah. They stopped circumcision. Right? Only Shevet Levi observed circumcision. That's when it says in Parshas V'Zosa Bracha, about Shevet Levi, V'Rischei Tzoru, they observed the covenant of God. In the Mitzrayim, only Shevet Levi observed Bris Milah. All the other Shvatim neglected it. They stopped practicing it. So we see tremendous spiritual decline. On the other hand, we see this amazing thing that they kept their Jewish names and so on and so forth. So we explained in the past ideas like this, and the Meshchachim explains it, that ethnically they were Jewish. They had all the trappings of Jewish ethnicity. They kept their Jewish names, and they kept their Jewish language, and the Jewish clothing. There was a group solidarity. Right? What is the idea of not informing one another? They saw themselves as being a unit, a tight-knit group, and their loyalty was to one another, not to the Egyptians. Right? They were doing barayas. It's the same idea that they said that these are our people; those are foreigners. We don't marry them. We don't consort with them. They were very ethnically Jewish. Philosophically, religiously, theologically, they gave it all up. Avodah Zarah, neglected bris milah. So why is it so important? Why is this such a great merit? So that the Meshchachim explains like this: because the Geula from Mitzrayim was because there was a covenant. God made a covenant with the Jewish people. So a covenant is like a contract. You make a contract with somebody, so you're bound by the contract. But what happens if the other party to the contract disappears, ceases to exist? So let's say, for example, you contract with a corporation, and the corporation is dissolved, goes bankrupt, it's dissolved, it loses its charter, so the corporation no longer exists. Well, the contract is not operative. It's not a breach of contract. The party to the contract no longer exists. So there's a covenant that God made with the Jewish people, but the Jewish people no longer exist because they've disappeared. Then there's no covenant, there's no contract, there's no agreement. So, therefore, in order that there should be a binding contract, there has to be an identifiable Jewish people. What makes us identifiable? The fact that we're a distinct nation. If we maintain our names, and we maintain our language, we maintain our distinct Jewish clothing, and we eat Jewish foods, right? You eat whatever Jewish cuisine is. So that means you're a Jew. You're a Jew. It could be that religiously, theologically, you're way off. You're far removed from what Jewish values are. But you are identifiably Jewish. And therefore, the covenant is operative. Now, does that mean that is a situation that can continue indefinitely? No, I think not. I think not. I don't know if Jewish ethnicity can last very long without Jewish values. I think that's really the question of the North American experience. Right? Jews came, so they were ethnically Jewish, but how long could they survive? Minus Torah, minus mitzvahs. That's a good question. And that's why the Geula from Mitzrayim had to come fast. That's why the miracle had to redeem us before we sunk to the lowest levels of impurity, because Jewish ethnicity isn't enough. But it's not a sufficient condition, but it's a necessary condition. It has to be, because when Jewish ethnicity disappears, then the covenant becomes abrogated. And I think that this really lends a little bit of insight into the idea of the schus nashim tzidkanius, right? The merit for which Klal Yisrael despaired from Mitzrayim is not rooted in Jewish theological values. It isn't because we believe in the monotheistic ideal. Right, that had lapsed in Mitzrayim. It only was revived through the experience of the Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Eser Makos. It's not because of Torah values, right? It's because we are a Jewish nation. We maintain this identity and commitment to nationhood, and therefore Chazal are just pointing out various aspects of this commitment, right? The symbols of ethnicity, names, language, clothing. Right, group identity, not informing one another, and commitment to continuity, to reproduction, to keeping it going, is also a part of that. The very fact that the Jewish women felt that there was something which needs to be perpetuated, needs to be continued, even though at this time the values that are meant to inform a Jew had lapsed, bris milah and monotheism, they began to practice Avodah Zarah. That's not the point. The point is that they still were a nation. They still saw themselves as a nation. They saw themselves as something which had to be sustained, so they had to perpetuate it. And it's an amazing thing when you think about it. Go to a secular person today and trying to explain to him why intermarriage is wrong. And you tell them, listen, this is, if you intermarry, you're placing the very survival of the Jewish people at risk. Well, what does it mean to be a Jew? If being a Jew doesn't mean anything, then why is the Jewish survival so important? It's a very, very tough question to answer. I don't know the answer to that question. In other words, if your Jewishness has so little meaning to the point of it being trivial, then what is the point of sacrifice for its perpetuation? But somehow, on some level, the Jewish people of Mitzrayim felt, even though they had lapsed in a very serious way, they felt there is something that is worth perpetuating. There is something worth sustaining. And that means dressing a certain way and speaking a certain way and giving a certain type of name, and it means identifying with the group, and it means perpetuating the group, having children so that the Jewish enterprise will not end in this generation. Right? All those are very, very, very important things. Right? Not in a theological sense, in a religious sense, but in the sense of creating and sustaining a nation that will be a party to the covenant with the Ribono Shel Olam. These are very, very important, and it was not schus that Klal Yisrael was saved from Mitzrayim. Okay, we'll hold here. Bez Hashem. We'll continue next week.